and I'm going to be introducing our special guest today. So our special guest grew up in Vietnam and Singapore. She graduated from Duke University with an MBA and currently lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. At 13, she won a professional comic script writing award from Ni Dong Publishing Company. And then she went on to publish more than 300 comics printed in magazines. Her first novel, The Girl Who Kept Winter, began as a blog post that went viral in 2007 and later expanded into a full-length bestseller. Her novels, comics, and graphic novels have been enjoyed by generations of Vietnamese readers, and we are very honored and happy to have her here with us today to give her presentation on writing a scene. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce Giao Chi.
Thank you, Marcus. And I'm very, very honored to be here today. And thank you for the opportunity for me to talk about the book and also to participate in the Author Festival. So today I wanted to spend a couple minutes just introduce myself, my past work, the book, The Girl Who Kept Winter, and then we will talk about visual storytelling, which is the theme of the Author Festival. And then subsequently, I will talk about how I wrote a scene in the book, The Girl Who Kept Winter, and then we will use the last part of the section today just for Q&A on the book or anything that you may have. So if that sounds good, I will just start with the introductions. And of course, I saw a few people are dialing in. So if you have questions or anything like that, you know, it's completely fine to interrupt and ask questions. So my name is Giao Chi, and I'm the author of the two books in the Winter Epic series. The first book is called The Girl Who Kept Winter, and the second book is called Fidget. And I would like to give a little bit of background on the history of the publication of these two books. The Girl Who Kept Winters were actually written in Vietnamese in 2007, and it started as a blog post. I think at the time it was blogger.com, if anyone even remember. And I was just came to the US. That was the first couple months I came to the US. I didn't have any friends yet, so I don't have a lot of things going on for me. So I would just write a blog, and I just post 1 or 2 chapters on my blog at the time. And surprisingly enough, it got really popular. And a publisher actually came over and approached me, and he asked to actually start printing that story on the magazine. And the magazine at the time was a teenager magazine, and the audience was between the age of 12 to 17. So I can show you what the publication looked like on the magazine. Let's share some screen here. And if you have any issues seeing it, please let me know. So yeah, this is what it looks like when it's published on magazines. So you have, usually there is some illustrations. There's actually not a lot of story. It's usually 1 chapter, and it's between 1,500 to 2,000 words. And this publication is run weekly. So this is kind of like the background of how it was published. The stories run on the magazine for a couple of weeks, and it actually received very well amongst teenagers. And people just loved it, and they sent in actually a lot of fan arts at the time, and I can show some of the fan arts as well. They're actually very, very cute, and you can see that a lot of them are very, very young. So you can see like these are the character that the audience drew and then sent into the magazine. I had just a couple now because it's been over a decade, so I didn't really have a lot of them anymore. So it was published, and then halfway through they decided that this is a really long form kind of story, and the magazine, because it's weekly, if you read a chapter you have to wait another week until you read, you know, what happened next. And also it's a teenager magazine, so the pages for story, it's prime real estate. It's really very, very hard to come by. And I mean, if we have a story that run there for, let's say, a year, over a year or more, like if you think about the book with like 18 chapter, that's a really, really long publication. So they decided that this is actually more suitable for a book. So they were like, okay, let's just do it as a book. And then that's one thing that's really interesting about the publication at the time, is that they actually paid me the entire amount of money before I finished the book, or even know how long it's going to be. So by the time they decided that they're going to publish it into a book, they were like, oh, okay, let's just do it within 60,000 word. So at the time I'm about 10 chapters in, and I was anticipate for this story to be running a couple years. So much, much more than just 60,000 word. But it's because that's the only option I have. I would just have to comply. So the first interesting thing about this book is that it's actually was published before it was finished writing, and it was also changes because of the audiences and the type of medium it was published on. And if you read through the book and if you pay attention, you can totally see that. You can see that the first couple of chapter was actually written slightly like, I guess, casually, and the audience seems a little bit older, but then between chapter 4 to chapter 12 the audience suddenly becomes really young, and between 12 to 18 it suddenly become a little bit older. And the writing, the following chapters definitely is more polished. It's just because I knew it was going to be published into a book. The first part is not as polished, just because I was writing on a plot. I didn't even pay attention to spelling errors. But and then eventually, I mean, it was published into the book. I decided that we just gonna keep exactly the way that it was written. It just because, you know, we have an audience that read it online, and they just didn't like if we change anything like that. I mean, just once you already have that impression of what the story is like, it's just a little bit jealous, and people just don't want changes at that point. So we keep it as is, and it's got published. It become very, very popular in Vietnam. It's actually one of the best seller in 2007. And if you remember what happened in 2007, is actually the year that Harry Potter 7 came out, and I'm actually surprised that people even talk about any other book outside of Harry Potter. So it was great. And then I moved on with my life, and I wasn't aware that, I mean, I guess in a sense I did. That people actually wrote into the publisher and they want the continue of the story. They just didn't feel that the story ended just yet. Now the story has an open end. It's not a cliffhanger. It's an open end. There's a very big distinction there. It has an open end, and I think for teenagers, they were just, you know, like I think it's just a little bit harder for teenagers to grasp the concept of like open end. Just like, you have to like tell me exactly what's gonna happen at the end. It's like, I cannot, there's so many interpretations, it's just so many options, it's hard. So I receive a lot of these fan mails, and most of them say the same thing. It's just, I love the story, I wanted to hear what happened next. It's like, can you continue, when are you gonna like write book 2? And to be honest, I was actually didn't really have the intention of writing book 2 at all. So what I decided to do with it is I just decided to disappear. So I just never used the name Giao Chi on any of my social network. I'm just basically hide away from, you know, anything that people can like look for me. And I use my English name, which actually is actually Annie. And then now fast forward 13 years later, it was last year, it was COVID, I was sheltering in place, I have nothing to do. And I still receive messages online somehow, like people can still find me. And I don't know how they do that, but I still receive message and just like, you know, I love your book and can you write book 2? And And now it's just 13 years into the future. And I'm like, dude, why are people still asking me about this like 13 years later? Um, but it is, and how I felt about that was, I mean, of course, I feel very flattered that people still remember it, but at the same time, for me, it's kind of like I'm owning somebody something. It's just like, it's like loan shark, like chasing after you, and you're like, oh my God, okay, fine, I'll pay it. So since it was sheltering in place, I didn't have nowhere to go, so I decided just to finish the story, as in like just write a continue of what happened in book one. And that becomes the Vietnamese version of the book two, Frigid. And then I finished the book and I got published. And then now I have readers that responded to me and say, hey, I read your book when I was a teenager. Now I'm like a mom's with 2 or 3 kids. I still love it. And, like, and things like that. And I just realized it's been 13 years. It's not just a book, it's the characters that live. Like, I barely remember anything 13 years ago. So it's for the characters, for the readers to still remember the character and still asking for book two. I think I kind of owe them something to just, to finish it. And that's how I just basically like uncovered the dust and decided to continue on the project. At the same time, I've also have lived outside of Vietnam for pretty much 50% of my lifetime. So I've spent the first half of my life in Vietnam and then the second half basically in Singapore and the US. And most of my friends now are speaking English and they can't read Vietnamese at all. So I decided that I'm just gonna translate it and give it to the friends that I make here in the US. So we actually work on the Girl Who Kept Winter, and the process was it's quite interesting, and I think that I wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't a famous Vietnamese book, because when I started doing some translation, I just felt like it's just too much. This book has so much unspoken Asian theme that it's very hard to translate. It's like it could be one sentences, but if you just read one English sentence, you would not understand. But for Vietnamese people, because of all the cultural context and everything, it's completely means something different for them. So the translation was just very overwhelming. And I just post on my Facebook and I say, hey, this is really a lot of work. And it's, and then someone actually just came in and he said, well, yeah, if you want to translate it, you need a village. And I think it was kind of a joke at the time just to say how difficult translating this book is. He's basically saying that it's harder to translate poem because of the way that it was written and also because of the context behind it. But that gave me an idea like, well, I do need a village to help me translate this. So I start actually asking for help. It's actually really, really good decisions because I end up with a team of, I think, more than 18 people helping me. Um, so they were Vietnamese readers from the Vietnamese book that maybe have, followed me in the last like 13 years. And then some of them was, I actually found them on, Fiverr and Upwork and other places. And I got really, really lucky because I found very, very good editors as well. So one of them, her name is Ashley Showers. And she's the one that did the editing for my first book and also my second book as well. And we just hit up really well. And I mean, when I checked with her and we had it goes beyond just a straight translation, but it's also a little bit of adaptations as well. Because with Ashley, have never read the Vietnamese before. When she read the English translation, she has a lot of insight about, oh, I didn't get this because, like I didn't have the context. So we actually filled in a little bit of information on, why certain things are written a certain way. And we did a little bit of translation. So if you read the Vietnamese version and the English version, there's slight different and there's a little bit more explanations that are happening in the English version that the Vietnamese version doesn't have, amongst many other changes. But the English versions and the Vietnamese versions are actually very close to each other. So I'm actually pretty happy with it. But I feel like I digress. So let's go back to what we were talking about. So I wanted to show some of the previous artwork. I think, Constant, would you mind mute your so we have a couple of publication in Vietnam, and this is one of their cover. This is the second publication of the book. I no longer have the first cover, which is really sad. And then this is another illustrations and cover. This is for the second book, Fidget. So over the year, you can see that even in the Vietnamese artist community, the way that they draw the characters are also very, very different. And I think that is because one is the way that I wrote the book. One common comment or review I heard about the book is that it's read like a movie, and it is, and it was intentional. At the same time, it's not specific. So there's like a little bit, I guess, conflicting review there, but I would explain to you why. So The Girl Who Kept Winter is actually my debut novel, but it was not the first book or the first work that I've ever done. I guess it is the first book because I never read any novel before. But it was, and as Marcus introduced at the beginning, I was a comic writer before that. So I happened to win a comic competition, professional comic competitions at the age of 13. And I started become a published comic writer, and I write weekly comic for Children Magazine over the course of, I think, 7 or 9 years. So when I was in middle school until I halfway through my college. So I wrote a lot of comic, and I guess I just never really see myself as anything else but a comic writer. Or if anything, it will be like a script writer, but I never write in scripts, so I can't really say that I'm a script writer. But yeah, like as a comic writer, the writing is very, very different from a novelist, because when you approach the story, you can really ease the users into feeling what the character is feeling. You cannot say that, oh, I'm sitting here and I'm feeling this like racing anxiety. Like you can't do that as a comic writer. Like you have to show a person sitting on the chair with maybe like sweat drop on their face, or like hands are shaking or something like that. Like hands are shaking. I'm shaking. But yeah, so as a comic writer, you just have very, very different instinct of how you create or tell the story. And I think that because of my previous work, when I approached The Girl Who Kept Winter, I just use the same approach for fictions as well. So I want to talk about visual storytelling. And my understanding of visual storytelling, and again, this is coming from someone who just wrote 2 books, so I'm definitely not the expert of this topic, but it's just my perception and how I write mine. And I perceive it as there's 3 different elements, I guess, amongst many other things, but the 3 different key things is, one is the visual description. So you're describing what the color is like, what the shape is like, what the texture is like, what the motion is like. Is it fast? Is it slow? Those kind of thing. Like, what does it feel when it touch your fingers? What does it looks like it feel? And I think that in my book, there's not a lot of that. And I think it was left vague at the beginning, because when I was writing as a blog, I didn't plan for it to be anything. Like it was just a blog. Like I wasn't planning it to be a book. I wasn't planning it to be a movie. I wasn't planning for it to be a comic. So it's kind of like, use your imagination and think about the world that you want to immerse yourself in. And you can definitely see that, like, in different readers' mind, the way that the person dressed, the type of costume, the world, the coloring, it's very, very different. Even the cultural outfit and things like that. This over here is one of the original illustrations, and you can see, like, just from one to another illustrating the same thing with different artists. There's completely different outfit and different thing. I think that a lot of writers focus on this and like just describing the world, and it's completely fine, for depends on the type of story that you're writing. For me, the elements that I focus on is actually the point of view and the showing of characters in actions. And I pay a lot more attention to these two than I do on the first one. And the second point is showing the point of view. And showing the point of view is picking what is it that you wanted to show. For a comic artist or comic writer, I think it's come very easy for me because let's say if you draw like walking down to market in San Francisco, you're not going to be able to draw all of the building, all of the people, everything's on the street. So you have to think about what is it that make this street Market Street. So is it like the San Francisco style building? Is it, the person that walk on the street? You just have to pick. And let's say if you walk in, if you draw a person sitting, on the bench in the garden, like what is it that you're going to draw? Like you have very limited number of strokes or time that you're going to spend on this painting. So you have to pick one is doable for you, that is not overwhelming you, and two is for the readers to, see that one particular event out of anything else around them. And the third point is showing characters in action, event, or interactions. And I think I focus a lot of this in building any sort of scenes in my book. So it's not really about describing what's going on in the world, necessarily on the way that it looks, the way that it feels, but it's also structuring it in a way that you feel like you're actually living through it or watching it as a movie. And my book was actually written in the third person omniscience point of view. So it's the feeling that I want to create is actually someone to sit there and actually watch the movie playing in front of them. So do you have any questions so far, or should I move on to talk about how I construct a scene?
There's questions, but we can hold off on those.
Okay, should I allocate time towards the end to answer those questions later? I just want to make sure I answer all the questions and just not rambling on for like an hour.
Yeah, don't worry. When you're ready for all the questions, I'll be happy to bombard you with them.
Awesome. So I will go into talking about how I construct a scene. And this is the scene in chapter 3 of the book, The Girl Who Kept Winter, in case you still haven't seen the cover. This is really gorgeous. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the background of the scene and why I picked this chapter. So for me, and again, this is just what I know instinctively when I was not trained as a writer or a comic writer, anything like that. But for me, as when I read or when I watch something, I'm very, very impatient. And if something doesn't catch my attention in the first, let's see, couple minutes into reading a couple pages, watching a few minutes, and if it doesn't catch my attention, I'm not gonna watch. I'm not gonna continue. So it's the same thing as a writer. I just feel that if I don't get someone interest in the first couple of pages, they're just not gonna stay. So that's why for me, there's a couple of scenes that's very, very important at the beginning of the book. That is kind of either, make it or break it. And this is definitely one of these scenes. And is this fair to say that if you read until the end of chapter 3, and if you don't like it, it is likely that you will not like the book. So I put a lot of effort into, thinking about like the first part of the book, and especially what is it in the first part of the book that, just make sure that this is the reader, this is the book for them, and this is the moment that they're like, okay, this is the book for me. So I'll talk about chapter 3, and I can't really see who's participation in the section, so I can really ask if everyone have read the book, and I can just give a lot of spoiler, or Marcus, do you have any preference?
I don't think there's any preference. If you're in the chat, in the Zoom right now, if you read the book, just do a quick thumbs up, and that'll let her know.
I can't see the chat. Don't seem to be able to use Zoom anymore. All right, I saw Sam just give a thumb up. I'm pretty sure he hasn't read the book, so.
Oh, someone's saying no spoilers, please.
Okay, awesome. So I will not provide any spoiler then, but I will do some summarize on this scene and the context behind it. So the first three chapters actually introduce the lead character. Her name is Dong Do, and it actually means the girl who kept winter in translation of her name. So Dong Do is a normal girl. She her family run a martial arts center, and it's also I guess the equivalent of a modern day UPS pretty much. So what they do is they just help people send package and just like provide guards to go with the package to make sure that it's safely delivered. Sorry, did someone ask a question?
No, go ahead, continue.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what she does for a living. She's 17 years old, so she's very young. And the first part of the book begin with her actually dying in her wedding. And it's also a wedding that she was forced into. And the first two chapters introduce some interactions that she has before the wedding. And the third chapter is when the first, basically, I call this the first beat of the story, which is this is the introduction of the story. This is who the key characters are, and this is the first event that actually happened in the story. And I'm sorry, I still have to provide a little bit of a spoiler because otherwise I can't talk about the scene. So the first chapter, that she died on her wedding. The second chapter revealed that she actually met someone else, not the one that she was marrying, 5 days before the wedding. And this character, Obsidian, is a very questionable because he appeared to be a very evil person at the beginning, but maybe that's not who he is. We'll see. So the third chapter happened when Obsidian actually showed up at her funeral. And I will go into how I actually write this whole scene. So the basic of any scene is, I have to talk more about like what this scene is about actually. So yeah, it has to be around 2,000 words because what the publications allow, I can't write more than that. The tone of the story is third person omniscient, so I can actually create and tell the story like I know everything, which I do. And then the audience are very, very young. For the teenager magazine is between 11 to 17, and I know a lot of people read past that point. So I was 26 at the time, so I would normally don't write anything for people older than me. So I would say 11 to 26 is the right audience. And again, I've already talked about how these scenes basically set the theme for the book, which is a little bit of mystery, a little bit of romance, a little bit of fantasy and martial art. And these scenes is not a romantic scene necessarily, it's a combination of a combat scene and a romantic scene. And one thing I also need to add is that before this book, I spent the majority of my time writing comics. So I write comedy, and it's all about being happy, like having fun. And then for this book, I just want to do something different. I just want to write something that is not happy. So I decided that I'm going to write something really sad. I'm going to write something with a lot of killing, with a lot of blood. It's like something very tragic. And as you read the book, you see that I'm not necessarily successful at that because it's still kind of funny throughout. But I try. So anyway, let's go back to how I wrote the scene. So as any of the scene.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Yes.
When you were talking about the blood and everything, do you think your previous experience working with mangas kind of influenced you to go that direction?
The manga, the comic that I wrote was actually very tame. It's for primary student. So there's never any killing or any blood or anything like that before. It is just something that I wanted to do that are completely different from everything that I've done before. So I've never write any killing. I've never write any blood. I never write any gore. So I thought that this was going to be the book that I write about all this like tragic and violent things, but it's not really. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that maybe the perception of mangas are different here in the US, but manga can be very tame for young, especially for primary kids. So like the type of comic I wrote is closer to, you know, like Doraemon, or it's very preschool. It's very safe. Yeah, anyway. So in terms of constructing the scene, and with anything, there's three parts, which is the beginning, the middle, and an ending. And this is the first beat. This is the first chapter of, not really, no, sorry, not the chapter, but the first part of the book. So there's still a lot of introductions that are going on. So it's still I'm gonna emphasize a lot heavier on just the beginning of the book. Sorry, with the description of a scene. So for me, when I write the chapter, I usually divide it into, you know, let's say if I have 2,000 words, I would divide it into three parts. And each of the part will just have, you know, a kind of an even number of words. So the first part will be, let's say for 2,000 divided by 3, and then I just kind of like pace out how much it is, and then start writing. So the first part will be the scene introduction, the player introductions, and the actual event that's gonna happen. I apologize, I'm a little bit like incomprehensive right now because I'm like, I think my blood sugar is actually dropping. So give me 1 second to like just grab a bite, and then I'll be right back.
That's no problem.
Sorry about that.
So people in the chat with us, let me go ahead and, wonderful. There we go.
My apologies, should totally have my lunch, and I actually did, but I'm still very hungry.
You're okay, don't worry about it. So we'll have some time at the end for questions. Some people in Facebook have already put some questions in. We have some questions that have been asked beforehand. Those of you who are in the Zoom with us, please feel free to ask some questions in the Zoom chat as well. We'll get to as many of the questions as we can at the end. If you prefer to ask a question in person, when we do open it up for questions, just give me a wave or a thumbs up or something to get my attention, and we'll see if we can let you do that. Also, those of you in the Zoom, when the stream ends, feel free to stick around and chat with Annie for as long as she's going to let us. So don't feel like you have to leave as soon as the stream ends. And again, I just want to thank everybody for being here. Annie, whenever you're ready, just let me know.
I am ready.
Okay.
Semi-recover. So yeah, so we had a beginning, the middle, and the ending of a scene. In terms of the beginning here, in this particular scene, what I need to do is I need to establish the introduction of the scene. You know, where it is, what is happening, what time is it of the day, and, you know, of course, you know, in terms of like how to establish this scene. So for English reader, when you read these scenes, you probably won't see a lot of this detail. It's just because for Vietnamese, there's a couple of descriptions that are, I mean, funeral in Vietnam there's certain steps, certain color, and certain things that, you know, doesn't change from one to another. So there's not a lot of description, and there is one slight different. There's one changes that we did in the English version is that we changed the color from white to black, because in Vietnam the color of funeral is actually white, and the color of obviously here is black. Whereas the wedding color is actually in Vietnam it was red, and here it's white. So in the Vietnamese book, there's a drastic transition of color from red, which is the early, I guess, early wedding and happy color, to white, which is the kind of like a funeral or mourning color. For the English version, the changes is not as drastic and it doesn't emphasize as much. It just because I think that I just didn't really rewrite the book, and for the English version, and the transition is just not as drastic. But in the scene, basically, there's some brief introduction just to kind of wrap up where we are. Now we're at the main hall of this martial art house. What it is her funeral, a little bit of the scenes of, what it's like, and a little bit of the color, like what's in it. Here I focus a lot more about the mood of the place. So we have a crying sibling, and we have, someone who has a crush on her as a child, who's like really, really sad and upset because because she's died. Give me 1 second. I also have no idea how's going on right now. Sorry. I feel like I should know how to use Zoom, but I don't. All right, and then the second thing that I need to do in this scene is that I have to introduce the player, and I'm calling them player, not characters, because when I say player is the one that is participate in this particular scene. So they are a character that has already been introduced before, but this is the introduction of them entering the scene and what they're going to be doing in the scene. I think the setup is really, really important. And you see that in this particular scene, there are 3 key players. Of course, we have Dong Tu, which is our lead characters. We have Bat Yung, which is our second lead male. And then we have, of course, Obsidian, which is our lead characters. And you can see that the introduction to Obsidian is done very, very early on into establishing the scenes. And is this before he entered the scene, there's already mention of him in the conversations around the funeral. And I think like just setting up, it's very important because it's build that anticipations of, what to come. And then of course here, I used a lot of just contrast in terms of introducing these player into the scene. We have the friends, and we have him crying. We have things that are familiar, and this part is just about making the reader understand that, this is the norm. She's dead. It's very sad. She's died for real. And then we have a contrasting, and I got as a supplement characters, but in Phúc, which is the guy that she is forced to marry, and he's not a very good guy. And the reason I brought him into the scene is that I just want that little contract set up where you see what's going on here. You have something that's very familiar. You have yourself, or the character that you're going to put yourself in. You have something that you perceive as, a bad or negative force, or something that's terrible. And then enter Bat Yung, which is a beautiful group of, Bat Yung looking really handsome with like 7 beautiful women that came with him, and they all looked really beautiful. So now you have something there with like 3 different color. And then now you continue setting up the scene, because this is going to be a fight scene. Like I knew that the fight's gonna broke out, so you have to make sure that you introduce everything for this particular fight scenes. You're gonna have something that is normal, or like the baseline. This is who you are, or like, who the lead character is. And then you have something that's like extra beautiful, which is Bat Yung, and the woman that showed up with silk ribbons, and then bows and arrows. So just spend a lot of time like setting up all of these player that enter the scene. And of course, a lot of contract is also emphasized, the main characters as well. And then the next thing I need to do with the scene is actually the lead character entrance. And I think this part I guess there's 3 things that I'm doing here. One is to create the ambience. What does it look like when the character enter? And this is the part about visual where you describe the things in the scenes that create the feeling of this character, or the mood that the characters is bringing. So let's say for this particular scene, the description that I focus on is just the candle, just the slight, slow wind that comes in, the way that the smoke trailing into the scene. And you have, of course, Obsidian at this point is a very dark characters. So as he walk, like, what do you hear? Like, what do you see? What do you feel? Like, is it cold because, you know, he's scary? Is that the sound of the snakes because it's danger? But yet you have something beautiful, like the stream of smokes and, you know, the beautiful and the candle and the current or something like that. And you can see that as he walk in, there's a current that drop into his shoulder. And I pick out this particular event because you can see, like, when you walk and this current that fall on you, it's actually kind of pretty. Like, you slowly took it off and you take your mask off. I think that is actually, it's very, very beautiful scene. I don't know if the readers view it beautiful, but for me, it's like, you know, it's kind of, there's a lot of anticipation, and it's not just, you know, this is not a fight. This is like, wow, this is something romantic is going to happen. And then, of course, you will see that as Obsidian enter, and this is what I set up earlier with, you know, the darkness and the meanness and the violence of Info, and the beautiful of Badiou. Like, he's not entirely beautiful, he's not entirely bad either. He's like somewhere in the middle. That's kind of makes you wonder, like, you know, what's going on with this guy. And then, of course, the subsequent part of the scene is what actually happened in the scene. And I know, like, I've spent a lot of time talking about the setup because I think that the setup actually make the scenes happen. So I will not provide any of the spoiler here, but this is where you actually describe what is it about the scene, what is the key event. There is a romantic event here, and then there is a fight that happened here. And then for each of these events, there's a beginning, there's the middle, and this end part of each of them. Let's see, for the romance scene, what happened at the beginning of the romance is like it slowly built up the actual romantic thing, action, and then the ending or the consequence of what happened there. It's the same thing with the fight. It's the beginning of the fight where it's built up slowly, the main actual fight, and then the consequence or what happened to the fight, to the story. Again, since I'm not providing spoiler, I can't really go into detail of this. And everything just to make sure that, you know, you have to keep the whole mood and feeling around the scenes, because I wanted to write mystery. Of course, I'm throwing in there like a little bit, like, you know, is she dead, or is Domto actually die, or has she not been dead, or what's going on here? I wanted to write romance, so of course there's the romantic part or romantic elements that happen. Of course, it's a fantasy book, so there's things that doesn't happen in real life, and of course there's the fight scene. So just basically it's checkbox just to like tick off everything that you need to write there. And then finally, the last part of the scene is just the conclusion. And this is where you basically wrapped up all of the scenes. After everything happened, what is the ending? What is the result? And then of course you set up for the next chapter as well. As you continue writing through, you cannot just like wrap them up and leave them there. So pretty much for me, I think this the last scene, and I can describe this without a spoiler, but what you actually see as a reader and as what I think you would see, is that the contract of the original color of the scenes is actually white, which is the funeral. Everything that you've seen so far has been white and the guy in black, and now you start seeing red, which is blood. You start seeing blood drop on the floor, and you will see this like, you know, like all white, and then the red that's actually starts spreading out. And then as the lead character look up, she can see what's happening around her, and you know the description of the scene itself. But the one thing that you need to wrap up in the end of the scene is what is going to stick in the reader's mind. And for me, you know, there's the color of the blood, the color of the blood, the one particular scene that when you're done here, that's the one thing that you remember. Again, I can't really I will not provide a spoiler here, but if you read by the end of chapter 3, you will realize the last sentence is basically is the one thing that is not resolved necessary, but this is the one thing that you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to read to see what happened here. And that's basically how I wrapped up the scene. And I wanted to show a artwork that are done by a Vietnamese artist of the scene in the chapter 3. I feel like if you don't have a context of what's going on here, it's probably hard to see what's going on, but it's a beautiful photo. So I knew I'm like ways over time. So it's time for Q&A.
All right. All I can say is wow. That's like a lot of great information that you gave us today.
Thank you.
I am one person who definitely wants to try to do some more writing, and it's the creating the scenes that I think has the biggest challenge, because you want to make sure that people reading it actually get to visualize what you're seeing, just like you said. Are you able to do that? Okay. Oh, so anyway, we're going to go ahead and do the question and answer. We do have some questions in the chat and some questions on Facebook, so I'll flip between the two and see how far we get.
I see some in the chat.
Yeah, we'll start with the ones in the Zoom chat.
Zoom.
Let's see here.
Yeah.
First one, how did you come up with the name, I'm sure I'm going to say this wrong, Dongtu?
Đông Tử.
Okay, I would definitely say that wrong. How did you come up with that name?
I would say wrong to it if I don't have the intonation on top of it. So it's a very unusual Vietnamese name, and that's true. It actually means the girl who we have a baby in the.
Oh.
Sure. Yeah, so her last name is Lưu, and it means remain or to keep. And then her name is Đông Tử. Đông is just winter. So Lưu Đông is actually mean keeping winter, and then Tử is actually mean a girl. It is very, very it's very unusual. But you can see that the character names actually say a lot about who they are or their destiny in the book. And because I was going to write Jajik's story, this character was going to die, or at least in the earlier version, I was going to kill her. And I guess she died in the first chapter of the book. So I guess that's the big hint. It's not a spoiler, really. It's just basically when I was writing it, just like, oh, a dead girl. And then, of course, there is a reason for her to be named the girl who kept winter. And you probably need to read the entire series to know why that is. But it's also actually taken from the name of one of my favorite mangaka, and her name is Rumiko Takahashi. And her name in Vietnamese translation is mean keeping the beauty. So I used the first I guess the first kanji, the characters to keep for my lead female characters, but it's just basically I just name it the way that the book was supposed to be written, the story of who she is.
Right. That kind of fits in with this Facebook question that we have, where someone's asking, how do you know what's going to happen next in the story, and do you have an ending in your mind when you start it? Or does it just kind of happen as you go?
For the first book, it happens as I go. And I wrote it in 2007, and I definitely, when I write a story, I do have an ending in mind. And I wrote in a note, and I mean, 13 years later, I lost the note, so I can't remember what it was. But what happened with this book is that after I wrote the characters, Obsidian, I really didn't want to kill him, and I also didn't really want to kill a bunch of characters that I was going to kill. Therefore, there's changes that had happened in the book, so I can say that like my original intention was, it's.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably not going to do that, but I don't know. We'll see. So there's a little bit of both. There is an ending, but it's the same time, as I write, I feel this empathy with the characters, and I might change my mind.
Okay. Next question we have is, how do you write a timeless romance without it coming off as bland or cheesy?
I did not intention. I mean, as a writer, I just really didn't think that it was going to be timeless or anything. And it just happened that it's still readable 13 years later, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I felt like anything that always human nature would be timeless. And I felt like something happened to you and how you react, and if it's rational, if someone can put themselves in the shoes of that character, it is probably going to be okay.
Okay. I'm going to switch over to some questions that we had beforehand. So do you ever think you become too wordy, or is it possible to describe a scene with too many words?
I mean, it could. As a writer, I'm not a wordy writer. I tend to just figure out what is it that I need to write in a chapter, and then I just try to write it with the least number of words possible. So I guess it could be like if you just putting information that doesn't really say anything, it could be wordy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how much planning or time do you think you personally spend on a scene for both when you did mangas and for your books?
How much time I spend on writing the scene or planning it?
Planning.
Oh, it's barely any time at all. Usually, I mean, it seems I actually spend significantly more time preparing this presentation than I do actually in writing, because some of these things, it's just something that I just knew and just like doing it instinctively. But again, it's like what I need to write here, I actually can show you what I planned for a chapter, and this is what I did for the second book, where there's a lot more characters. There's over 100 characters by this time, and I do actually need to write them down. For the first book, I actually didn't write anything down. Everything is in my head. But for the second book, because I have significantly more characters, I just basically plotted out as simple as this. This is everything that I need to write in the first chapter. What are the key events that I need to write about? What is in that particular event? And then of course I also change as I go as well, like something that I plan initially, and as I write it, it just doesn't make sense. I just remove it. But I mean, for me, like when I write a book, I kind of break it down into different portion. Like there's a beginning part, there's a middle part, there's a ending part, and then for this series, there's 18 chapters. So each three chapter will be, I call them a beat, which is kind of like the first part of the story, the next part, and whatnot. So then like the first three chapter is a group, the second three chapter is a group, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so it's barely any time planning, really. So Peter asks, you outline the whole story point chapter before writing prose? Question, the answer is no. So I start out with literally an Excel sheet. This is what I did at the beginning of second book. It usually like a couple of lines. here, and then this become unmanageable and then moved to here. So I tend to be very disorganized as a writer, and I build them as they come. But usually, like, each of these are the thing that I need to do for the entire book. Like, you have the main character story, and then you have the sub characters, the sub story arc, and then it's a couple of minor thing that you need to do here. Like, one of the things that I do is that I had a line for the weather. And this is something that I write at the very end, because if you actually have to keep all of these like multiple streams of thoughts and story as you write, it can be really messy. And I do like to write about the weather because, it's the weather, everybody likes weather. So I do have like a line for the weather here, and you can see that like this basically set the season throughout the book. So let's say I knew that the first 3 chapters happened in the end of winter, and then the next chapter happened in summer, and so on and so forth, the fall and something like that. And this is something that I would just go back and write the description at the very end.
Wow.
But yeah.
That's really amazing. It's nice to kind of get to see what someone's thought process sort of looks like when they're creating something like this.
Thank you. How I am curious about how other writers do, and again, this is just a process that worked for me to make things more controllable. And I actually don't know what is the correct way or the proper way to do it.
Or is there even a proper or correct way?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, whatever work.
Okay. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up to any final thoughts. One more question we had previous was, how much research did you do to describe the martial arts or the wardrobe or the scenery for your books?
So I did research for just, random stuff, like in the second book, and this is a joke that are kind of a running jokes, but the second book is about the feeling of being friend zoned or being heartbroken. And yeah, and the running joke is that, wow, I don't really know what it feels like to be friend zoned. That's something I actually researched. And the other thing on the second book, which is talking about griefs, and I'm so sure everybody have experience in their life, but this is very, very different of how people processing grief, and I just make sure that I had a holistic view and understanding it. So I went through, actually read a lot of article about, the stages of grief. And I mean, you can see that in the second book too, just to make sure that, it's not irrational. It's just like, okay, this is how human process emotion. And, then maybe the characters can process it slightly differently, but this is what their mental states are like. And that's what I researched for the second book, for example. For the first one, I did some research on, the way that the poison work, and how some of the for martial arts, it's fantasy martial arts. So I think I had a lot of leeway with fantasy because you can just construct the world, and as long as the world is logical, it should be fine. So it's not a lot of research that have to be done there. I think it's just more about, okay, if something is flying, does it has the aerodynamic structure to fly? Like the ring, can it fly? Something like that. So I think I guess I really don't have to, because I mean, it's a fantasy, if you say something fly, it would fly, but I would try to like, think about it. Well, if something like that, can it actually fly? But yeah, so it's not really on the martial arts research. It's more just random stuff about, going through the type of emotion that I don't experience in real life, or, certain thing like interactions is like, if you throw this into that, like, would that reaction happen? Something like that, I would research it.
Wow. By the way, if you ever need to do research on the friend zone thing again, feel free to ask. I can give you all the information on that.
Maybe I just been friend zoned in the past and I just didn't know about it. But I've definitely, had my heart broken. I've definitely have been ghosted on, and I felt the sense of murder drive. Anyway, TMI.
We have one more Facebook question, and I think it's a really, really important one.
Okay.
So we have your first book here at the library, which is available for people to check out right now. It's actually checked out. Otherwise, I'd be happy to show everybody. Your second book, Frigid, is available on for download, I believe, as a Kindle.
They're both Kindle and paperback.
Okay, so
See it.
if you're listening and watching, please feel free to go and find her books. So the question we have on Facebook is, what about the possibility of a third volume?
I would love to if I have the effort or the time. If the star aligns, I would love to.
Mhm.
I think that is when I create the series, it was going to be a very, very long series. And of course, with any long series, it has to have a lot of support and a lot of readers along the way. And I think, especially with the English version, it's just the beginning. So I'm hoping at one point it becomes popular enough that it's enable me to write the third one.
Okay. Well, that's great. Go ahead and pin us both again. Oh, can you stop your screen share if you have? Okay, thank you. We got it.
Cool.
All right. If anyone else has questions, especially you guys in the Zoom, again, stick around. We'll hang out for a few minutes. You can say hi, tell her how great she is. But we're very grateful that you were able to be here and do this for us today.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I want to play a quick game. I did this with Claudia Christian. She's one of the other authors that I had a chance to work with for the Authors Fest. So I call this or that. It's a really quick, I'm going to give you two choices and you tell me which of those two choices you would prefer. Okay, so, and this is just a fun thing, so. Ready?
Is it audience or me?
You.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, so the first question is sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
Sunset?
Yeah.
Hot shower or a hot bath?
Hot bath.
Italian food or Mexican food?
Oh, I'm eating Mexican food right now. It's because I'm eating Mexican food right now, so I would say Italian.
Okay. And if you could have any superpower, what would that superpower be?
Oh, to be able to write on this book like really quickly.
That would be a great power, I think. All right. Well, again, thank you for being able to participate with us in this Authors Festival. It was a lot of fun to have you talk about writing a scene. I'm going to go ahead and do our outro. Again, you guys on the Zoom, stick around. So thank you for joining us today for our virtual Authors Festival 2021. Oh, Annie, before I finish up, do you have anything else you want to say? Any final words?
I think I'm good. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's definitely an honor to be here and, to talk to the library. And I really appreciate the library acquiring my book and create this event for us to talk about the book.
Great, thank you. So again, thank you for watching, everyone. Please continue to support all of our other presentations that we have. Special thank you to Giao Chi, or Annie Fan, however you know her, for presenting today. The Octavia Philem Public Library here in Gallup invites you to join us for live and recorded presentations the rest of the month of May. You can find our schedule of events on our website at ofpl.online. Please make sure to follow us on Facebook. Please like and subscribe to all of our other social media, such as YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, leave us some comments down below. We love to hear from you. And again, on behalf of the Octavia Falin Public Library, we thank you for watching.
Thank you.